Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody here. It is today's February 12th, 2020, Board of Finance, Town of Southington, and we're going to begin with the Board of Education presentation of the fiscal year 2020-2021 operating budget. I'd like to call forth the Chairwoman of the Board of Education, Mrs. Terry Carmody, to introduce this budget to us. And you can pull the microphone down. We had some technical problems a few minutes ago.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Finance, those in attendance tonight, and members of the community watching from home. Thank you for the opportunity to share information with you regarding the Board of Education's 2020-2021 budget. I just have a few brief introductory remarks that I will then turn the presentation over to the administration. As you know, the Board of Education has a responsibility to recommend a budget that funds the programs and services necessary to provide the best educational experiences for the children of this community. Work on the budget proposal starts with the full administrative leadership team and is then filtered through the central office team and the superintendent to the Board of Education. Members of the Board of Education had the opportunity to review, discuss, and ask questions about the funding recommendations and proposal in this budget for a significant period of time. The review included 2 very well-attended public workshop sessions, in addition to 2 Board of Education meetings. Thank you to those of you who were able to attend one or more of those sessions. Your presence and attention to the process is noted and genuinely appreciated. The end product of many months of work is the budget proposal that you have before you this evening. The Board of Education adopted the budget proposal at a regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting on January 23rd, 2020. We believe that this request is a fair and balanced proposal. It will allow the community of Southington to fulfill its obligation to continue to provide a high-quality public education to every eligible student. We know that it is the Board of Finance's responsibility to balance all of the needs of this community, including public education and all of the valuable and necessary services our friends and neighbors have come to expect as residents. It is, of course, our hope that you will view the budget proposal before you in the way that it was intended, as a well-balanced, intentional, thoughtful plan to meet the needs of our community. In the days and weeks following this presentation, we welcome questions from the Board of Finance members. My suggestion, Mr. Chairman, is that we use the procedure that we have used in the past and channel questions from Board of Finance members through the chairpersons of our respective boards to the administration. Questions and responses can be placed into a grid for dissemination. In the past, this method has proven to be very effective and efficient. I thank you for your time and for your service to our community. I will now turn this presentation over to the superintendent and his team. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have 2 members absent, but they've assured me they will watch this. It's going to be videotaped and have a deep interest in the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Leary. Thank you, Mrs. Carmody. Just wanted to, first of all, echo Mrs. Carmody's comments. Thank you for your time and attention. I know that folks have come to the workshops and have often paid attention to the discussion that's gone on over the past month or so, especially with regard to some of the subtle nuances of the budget. So thank you for that. Some of my comments this evening you may have heard before, and if so, I apologize for any redundancy. Some I obviously think are going to bear repeating. So as we get to the outset here, and I will remember how to use the remote control. So as I've said a number of times, again, just at the outset, we know the Constitution of the state of Connecticut guarantees a free public education to all students in grade kindergarten through grade 12. And we know the Connecticut General Assembly delegated that responsibility to provide the constitutionally guaranteed public education to local communities and charged the State Board of Education with oversight, authority, and responsibility. So boards of education in Connecticut have a dual responsibility to the local community, but also to the state in discharging the state's responsibility to provide public education. So in Connecticut, it's a statutory obligation of the Board of Education to submit a budget for consideration that is designed to meet the needs of the school district. In Southington, as in many school districts across the state, needs will always outweigh the ability of the community to provide the necessary fiscal resources. The proposed Board of Education budget for the 2020-2021 school year provides a reasonable balance to the legal responsibility of supporting the educational needs of the community while acknowledging the fact that fiscal resources are limited. So, the board is often asked the question, what are you trying to accomplish with this budget? What does the budget do for our community? About 2 years ago, through involvement with many members of our community, organizations and groups, parents, students, etc., the board adopted Vision of a Graduate for the Southington Public Schools. And as you can see from the Vision of a Graduate slide, the overall purpose and vision is literally to prepare graduates of the Southington Public Schools to be college or career ready and prepared for life beyond by mastering the knowledge and demonstrating the skills to communicate effectively, think creatively and critically, and contribute to the global economy. So that's a broad yet attainable vision. Every action or decision relates to the vision. The Board of Education and the administration believe that this budget allows the district to move closer to realizing the vision of a graduate for all students. To that end, we believe this budget is thoughtful and deliberate. It maintains and supports the most effective services. It supports implementation of innovative initiatives. District needs are addressed in a continuous and incremental fashion. The data continue to show that the community of Southington receives great value for its investment in the public schools. School funds are used in an effective and an efficient manner. This budget will support the type and quality of learning experiences that families and community members have grown to expect for the children of Southington. Support for the public schools in our community is a necessary component for the overall economic well-being of the community. Sorry. Oh, it's the device.
Keep it away from them.
Here we go. Arm's length, Mr. Shota.
That's good.
So we have some introductory slides that you've seen here in terms of authorship, Board of Education Central Office, and members of our administrative leadership team. Now, our very first slide, Sherry, I didn't tell you ahead of time I was going to ask you to do this, but Mrs. Dinello loves this slide and is the very best person to explain the contents. It can be a little confusing, and you all have seen this before, and for folks who are watching for the first time at home, I think it deserves a very concise and eloquent explanation, and I'm pretty sure I'm not capable of being concise, so I'm going to ask Mrs. Dinello to do that. So Mrs. Dinello, if you would, please. Sorry, I meant to tell you I was going to do that ahead of time.
Good evening. I know as members of the Board of Finance, because you had been instrumental in approving the 2019-2020 budget, you are very familiar with the fact that there were actually 3 separate line items approved by the Board of Finance related to the Board of Education. So if you look in the column of the 2019-20, you had approved just over $98,000 for our operating budget. And then due to the late notice of the anticipated increase in the municipal employee retirement system contribution by the employer increasing dramatically, however, we weren't sure of what that legislation was actually going to look like in the end, you chose to keep a separate line item for the anticipated increase to the Board of Education for that retirement contribution. In addition, there was some discussion about the state increasing or requesting that the town begin contributing to the teachers' retirement system. and that $270,000 was set aside if, in fact, that came to fruition. However, you know that the TRB contribution was not put on the local municipality, and we did incur the MERS contribution increase. So when we were developing the 2021 budget in consultation with the town manager, we asked the question, would we be looking at one operating budget line item for 2021, or is there an intent to continue the separate accounting of the MERS contribution line? And in conversation, he felt that now that we know what the increases are looking like for the next 5 years, that account should be rolled back into our operating budget. So in an effort to show what the true increase is of the Board of Education's operating budget, we thought it was important to start with our total request of just over $101 million. However, the increase to MERS for not only 1920, but now the additional increase for 2021 is included in that $101 million. So in an effort to get the true increase of the percentage that we're asking for as a budget increase, we highlight there the 3.12%, and we do that by adding both the operating line and the MERS contribution line from 1920. We have not taken into account the line item for the TRB, because although that was essentially money set aside for the Board of Education, it was money that we do not need for the current year, we will not need for next year, and felt it was only fair to really show the increases of 3.12 versus the 284. So the real increase to the operating budget or to the town as a whole is 284, but in really showing what the requested increase of our operating budget, we all agreed in consultation with the superintendent and the town manager that the 3.12% is the correct number.
Thank you, Mrs. Tonello. So much of the rest of this you've seen before, so I will be succinct and we'll move through it. And I know that we will have a workshop in the near future. So if we look at breakdown between regular education and special education, you can see the projected or the proposed increase for both. In regular education, that increase is about $1.6 million, which is a little over a 2% increase. For special education, it's about between 1.4 and 1.5 million, and you see that it's almost a 5.8% increase. The reason that we separated it this way this year is because we really wanted to show the differences here. If you look at the next slide, and there's two ways to look at this. One, of course, is this chart. You can see that regular education or general education is about 73% of the operating budget. Special education is about 27% of the operating budget. Of course, the major projects and equipment would then end up being divided between those two areas. This is a little different way of looking at that. So again, you look at the operating budget, which is in blue, and the special education budget, which is in a color that looks like maroon to me. Okay, Sherry? Close enough. But yet you can see that it's disproportionate, really, when it comes right down to it. So special education is 27% of the budget, yet you can see the increase is almost the same. I've got to tell you, I think that we have done a pretty darn good job for the most part of assessing where we are and trying to make continuous improvements and do that incrementally in our operating budget. And I think you can see that in the general education portion. Special education is an entirely different situation, and there are a lot of pressures on school districts that go along with the cost of special education. Special education is something that's absolutely necessary to meet the needs of probably our most vulnerable students. It just has to be, it's a very expensive proposition. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move down. But that was the reason for including those two things in there, and you can see the differences. Now, if we look at the major components of the budget, very typical. We're not different really than most other school districts. A little over 61% of that is salaries. Just under 20% is benefits. One of the things that I really wanted to make sure that we considered, though, this year is the purchase services category, because that's, 14.66%. That's approximately $14.9 million. And oftentimes in the past, we've had discussions, and in those discussions, I've heard comments such as, well, we need to fund it for salaries and benefits. Purchase services has an awful lot in there. Our transportation contracts for a lot of services, et cetera. And, again, if we're talking about a $14.9 million chunk of the budget, it's just something I wanted to make sure that we keep in mind. Those three things together, as you see, are just under 95.6% of the budget, those three areas. Now, with everything, print is a little small from here, but if you were to look on page 4 of the budget, there's a slightly different way of looking at the breakdown, but those are all the areas. And again, you can see the three big pieces of salaries, benefits, and purchase services. Then it's broken into the other areas. But as I said, at slide 11, page 4 in the budget is a little bit more complete breakdown. It might be easier to look at. So if we look at the components of the budget increase, these 5 areas account for almost 2.9% out of the 3.12% increase. And you can see salaries there, that's a little over $1 million, a little over 1%. The new personnel figure is about, it's a little over 1/4%, and we'll break that out for you. And benefits, which are health benefits and everything else, all the retirement benefits, Social Security, Medicare payments, the MERS contributions all roll into that. And equipment and special projects, you see, is just under 0.4%, and major projects and equipment is about the same thing. We included in here an update of the enrollment analysis that was completed by Mylone and McBroom and presented in June of 2019. And that was on June 6th, so if folks want to go back and look at the June 6th Board of Education meeting, you can see that whole piece. And I believe the way the link shows is that all of the information that's in their PowerPoint comes right up so that it's pretty easy to view. I've also reproduced that in the budget book, which is on page 83. But one of the things that we want to point out here, so elementary enrollment is still projected to increase. So in the 25-26 school year, we're looking at close to 190 more students. And then in 28-29, about 167 students. So over the span of 9 years, we're looking at an increase in elementary enrollment anywhere between about 170, 190 students. And we'll continue to update that, but it's pretty clear from that projection. And the Mylone and McBroom projections have been pretty close. In their full report, which is on our website, and also you can see in that presentation, they're very, very close. A little up, a little down, in different areas, but in terms of accuracy. You'll also see that the middle schools, they'll drift down a little bit, but then they'll climb right back up again to levels that exceed where they are right now. The high school will drift down gradually. Excuse me, I think the decrease in enrollment at first was around 3%, and then it ended up being about 7% from when we first did this in 2017. But if you could extrapolate out and put another 5 years on this, which obviously we won't do right now, just based on the elementary and middle school numbers, you'll see that the high school numbers will trend upward again. Now, funds have been added here for new personnel, and in regular education, or general education as it's sometimes called, you can see the dollar amounts there. And then there are 2 items for special education, which are a little different. The special education program expansion we'll talk a little bit more about as we move in here a little further. But there's descriptions for regular education. The description and rationale, those are on pages 9 and 10 in the budget book, which you have and you've probably read already. And the special education, the descriptions and rationale, those are on page 53 in the budget book. Just briefly to talk a little bit about what the personnel is. As I mentioned, those descriptions are in the budget book, but they're spread out in a variety of different areas, from world language at the high school to a math specialist, registered nurse increase. All of those are based on increases in student enrollments or trying to meet the needs. For example, with the registered nurse, we just have the incredible number of visits to nurse's office throughout our district. And so we're pretty confident that adding another 0.5 FTE, as full-time equivalent, will help in that area. We've added some stipend positions, as you can see in there, and this goes back to an area that we started several years ago, but we weren't able to continue to move forward on because of some of the fiscal issues that we had. And those areas help out with student supervision and, again, trying to do the right thing for our students when they're out there. And also the one with technology assistance. Again, those are incremental changes, trying to increase our ability to meet the needs of the vast amount of technology that we are acquiring at the building levels. So in special education, again, I said that it was split. A teacher at Southington High School, and again, you can read the rationale for that in the booklet, and the school psychologist. And then that's just 2.0, and then we'll talk a little bit about the expansion piece. But the teacher at Southington High School, we really have a situation where we are required by law to provide what's called transition services for students. And transition services are really school to post-school. And that can take on a variety of aspects. That can be into work, it can be into post-secondary education, it can be into training programs, et cetera. And we really have the need to try to meet the needs of the students in that area, and we really have not been able to do that adequately with the numbers that we have right now. The psychologist position is to try to meet the mental health needs. We've been doing that gradually, and we have been increasing mental health staff almost for the entire time that I've been here, and this is a continuation of that. Sorry. So the other piece here is a special education program expansion. And for that, we are also proposing some new staff. First of all, there's one teacher, a special education teacher. BCBA stands for Board Certified Behavioral Analyst, and an ABA therapist, Applied Behavioral Analysis. Those are a couple of concepts. We'll be happy to explain that if you would like, but those are very specific areas of specialty in speech-language pathologist. So those are the personnel, and again, FTE means full-time equivalent. That's for this one program that we will talk about in a moment. Major projects and equipment. You can see the descriptions and rationale for those on page 66 through 74 in the budget book. These are just some examples of those. We have a list which grows every year, but we try to take some items off that list every single year. And we just try to attend to that. It's all part of building maintenance, program enhancement, et cetera. Now, our special education coordinators did a really, really good job of presenting to our Board of Education information about our in-district programs and the continuum of services in Southington. So continuum of services is a concept in the federal law and mirrored in the state law, and it goes from least restrictive environment, which is the general education classroom without any supports or with a low number of hours for support, all the way to the most restrictive. The most restrictive environment for a student actually would be in an out-of-district placement, and even those go by degree of restriction. What we've tried to do is create in-district programs for students so that those students would be educated as close to the least restrictive environment as possible. So we know from research and best practice that supporting and educating students with complex special needs in district is best for children. It's better if they're educated with their peers as close to their home school as possible, with their neighbors. It works best for them all the way around. We have, over the last 5 and 6 years, under the guidance of Ms. Walsh and her team, been able to create in-district programs or expanded them. And these in-district programs are high quality and they're cost-effective. Without the in-district programs that have been created or expanded, many students would require out-of-district programs to meet their needs. Those are absolutely more costly than what we can do in district. I did include here a little glossary of terms for the programs. You'll see these program names in the budget book and elsewhere. And we have very creative staff, so you'll notice that not all those acronyms, the letters don't only have one word to go with them. Some of them have like complete paragraphs, I think. But be that as it may, those are the names of the programs, and you can see the definitions there. We'll refer back to that afterwards. There'll be a little quiz at the end of the presentation. So we looked at our in-district programs, and now this is just for this year. So this is for fiscal year 20, right? The 2019-2020 school year. And this is really just salaries and benefits. There are incidental costs, there are supplies, et cetera. But this is really just the bulk of it. And to run these programs, and we have 6 or 7 of these programs, it costs about $2.9 million. Right, that's the cost of operating those programs, absent the costs of supplies and materials and things of that nature. So that's a pretty good estimate for the major costs, because we know it's personnel related. So, and here are our programs. I asked our staff to look at our existing programs and to identify students in each of those programs who would need out-of-district placements if we didn't have that particular program. So they identified these students, and there are right now, in our public schools, 41 students who are being served in Southington as opposed to being served in a placement outside of Southington. I also asked them to look at the average cost for out-of-district placements. Now, they do vary, and so these are the averages. We have some out-of-district placements that are very costly. A lot of that has to do with the nature of the disabilities that a student presents with and the complexity of the case, the facility, the distance, et cetera, et cetera. So taking all of that into consideration, these are the average costs, and you can see the total there. Transportation always sticks out at me. It's very, very costly to transport students these days. Extended school year is summer programming for students. Most students who have significant disabilities need education beyond the 180 days required by state statute. And in federal and state law, we're required to look at that, see if students are eligible for extended school year, and most of our students who would be in out-of-district placements clearly are. Hence, we've included that in there. So the average for an out-of-district placement is the dollar amount that you see there. It's a little over $130,000. For those 41 students, that's about $5.3 million. And that's what we would be paying right now if we did not have those programs in district where these students can attend with their peers. So it's just simple math, but you can see through that the savings in doing this just in this year, this is just fiscal year 20, is about $2.4 million. We didn't go back and look at last year or the year before that, or even what we're thinking about for next year. The work of these folks has really saved this community a tremendous amount of money over the years, but more importantly, we've also been able to provide really great programming for our students, which of course we know is important to all of us. But I wanted to point that out. We're often asked, well, what are you doing that's innovative, et cetera, et cetera. In this particular area, I think we're doing a pretty darn good job of creating great programming for kids. and we're saving dollars for our community as a result of that. Now, we have included in this budget some dollars, and you can see the cost there. It's about $357,000 for a special education program expansion. We have in our budget book, excuse me, in our budget book, we included the slides from that presentation that our special education coordinators did back in December for our Board of Education. And one of the things that they noted is the need for programming for students who fall somewhere on the autism spectrum. And you'll notice that I'm always saying students with disabilities or students who have complex needs, students who fall on the autism spectrum. They're students first, they're children first. That's how we talk about it. And I think that's important because it brings out the fact that these are students first and foremost. The disability is secondary. And we provide the services that students need, regardless of their level of disability. At any rate, one of the things that our staff found is that from the 2013-2014 school year, we've had an increase of almost 37% of students who are identified on the autism spectrum. Now, that literally is a spectrum. If you go 180 degrees, which is essentially a flat line, we have people on one end of the autism spectrum who are unbelievable achievers, high-achieving students and individuals who are very, very capable and go on to higher education, go out into the work world, and do lots of things that students who do not have disabilities are capable of doing. At the other end of the autism spectrum scale, we have some students who are nonverbal and who can't do those things and who may not be able to do them, but who certainly have some potential. We've got to try to bring students from point A to point B, so to speak, and everybody in between. So it literally is a spectrum of needs, if you will. The increase in the numbers of students we have right now, we know of some students who are coming to us right now and who are coming to us in the coming school year. In order to meet the needs of those students as identified by their planning and placement team, we'd have to add staff one way or the other. And that's about $230,000 cost for those staff. And that would be just to meet those needs. And then we'd have to add again in the following year, and it wouldn't give us a lot of flexibility. So our special education team really designed the concept of creating another in-district program which would give us some flexibility. We could meet the needs of the students we know are coming to us next year and have flexibility to have more students over time. I mean, again, if we didn't add this as a program right now, we'd still have to include about $230,000 worth of staffing and have no flexibility. And all we would need, quite honestly, is one out-of-district placement at that average cost, and it would put us over that dollar amount, or at about that dollar amount, and 2 out-of-district placements, and we'd be way over that. So trying to meet the needs of the students in a way that we think makes sense, keeping students in district, providing good services to them, and at the same time, down the road, this one particular program, I think, is going to save us money. Again, that to me is not the most important thing. The most important thing is providing the appropriate services for students, but we're doing it in a way that is going to save us money down the road. Now, we did not sit down and say, well, in fiscal year 21, that means we're going to save X amount of dollars, because we don't know if this program is going to eventually be put into implementation. Obviously, we have to go through the whole budget process to see where the dollars fall out. It sure makes a lot of sense for us to think that we'll be able to do that, but we just did not sit down and do that. I will say that knowing what we have coming in, where our staff are right now in terms of providing services with students, and we're going to find a way to do it somehow, because I think it's in the best interest of students. And as I said, I think it's pretty fiscally responsible of us. So I wanted to leave you with one thing. We're all dedicated to providing the children in this community with the best possible educational experience. And I made quite an emphasis on special education here today because I wanted you to understand, and I wanted members of the community to understand that it is expensive, but it's really, really important for those students who we're designing programs for. I think we're all trying to pull in the same direction, all of us, whether you're an elected official on the Board of Finance, the Board of Education, the Town Council, people who work in the schools. We're all trying to do the right thing, and we're trying to, obviously our emphasis is on doing the right thing for kids in this community. So I just wanted to leave you with those two quotes up there because I think they're pretty meaningful. And for those of us in education, it's not just a job for us, it's a passion, it's a calling. And those two quotes, I think, ring true. Nelson Mandela, I think this was in 1990, said that education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. We want our students, as graduates of the Southington Public Schools, to go out there and change the world and do great things, do positive things, come back and help our community. And of course, Mark Twain, resident of Connecticut, out of the public schools grows the greatness of a nation. We really believe that. I believe that. And we're certainly trying to do the right thing for the students of our community. So thank you. I know that was a little longer than I intended to, but thank you. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
We'll have a little time for some high-level questions, and we'll go ahead and use our grid to send the more formal questions back. There were some benefits to that. Number one, we don't ask redundant questions, and number two, questions we ask and get answered are shared with town council or other stakeholders in the process, so they don't have to ask the same questions later. So it becomes one document that just grows into a collection of our questions. So I'll send something out on that.
Stay over there.
Yeah. Want me to move? Want to stay there? Stay there. We're a smaller group. Will be more cohesive. So if there are questions, we have everybody here from Board of Ed and the Superintendent's office to have a little bit of dialogue to start it out. So I'll let anybody ask anything that they want to at this point. And again, these are big picture time before we put the detailed question grid out.
Okay. I've got a question on the enrollment projections. Actually, it's a double question. The first is on regular enrollment, and the second is on special ed. I guess I didn't really follow the enrollment projections because if you look at, say, you show the elementary schools, going more and more over time. But then in the same sort of 5-6 year time period, you're showing the middle school and the high schools going down. Now, usually it's like, a sort of a pig going through a python, right? It should kick up the middle school and the high school 4 or 5 years down the road, but it's not showing that. Any idea why? Or
Actually, if it was graphed a little different, it would. Milo and McBroom did this for us in the first presentation, but that was back in 2017. So you see the elementary schools will drift up. In their first iteration, they drifted down a little bit, so they're going to drift up. If you graphed the enrollment of the middle schools, it would actually look like a U. So from where it is now, it goes down a little bit, and then it comes back up, which is logical given the fact that you've got increasing enrollment at the elementary schools. Right. The high school, the slope of the line is very gradual, and it tends to go down. And as I said, though, if you could extrapolate that out, now typically they don't do projections out more than 10 years, but if you were to extrapolate that out, just seeing the elementary enrollment going up and the middle school enrollment going up, that high school enrollment is going to drift back up again. So I think what's it have there for the lowest, like 1845, 1850, something like that. Mm-hmm. If you look, probably, if you were able to project out another 3 years, you'll start to see that tick back up again. But yeah, that's just in a chart. If we graphed it, that's what it would look like. You'd see the slope of the elementary line, although the slope would be relatively shallow, would be an upward trend. I don't even know how to represent the middle school mathematically because it's a U shape, and the high school you'd see the slope trending down a little bit. Now, special education.
Yeah. Before you the question was essentially what's driving the increase. Obviously, you talked about programmatic stuff, government mandates, what we have to do.
Yep.
But there's also, obviously, the amount of students is a driver there. So how does the special ed sort of go between those two factors?
Sure. There's two things. When you see elementary enrollment going up, right, I'm going to answer the question about the where. There were at least two significant factors that Mylone and McBroom gave us. First of all, the birth rate is going up, but not that dramatically. So the birth rate is ticking up. The most salient piece there is what's called in-migration. It's people moving into Southington with school-age children. And we've all driven around Southington and seen the for sale signs up on houses, and then see 2 days later there's a under contract sign up. They just are selling, and we do have people moving in with school-age children. So that's where some of that is coming from. The most significant out of those two items that I mentioned, according to the Mylone and McBroom study, was the in-migration piece. Now, with regard to special education, the percentage of students being identified with special needs has increased. And I think that is a trend that we're seeing nationally. It certainly is statewide. Just about every community statewide has seen an increase in the percentage. And I think our identification rate has varied. It was as many as 6 or 7 years ago, it was about 13% of our student population. We're up around 15%. We have some communities that are much higher than that, quite honestly. Now, the reason for that, whether the issues are becoming more complex, whether people are getting, one of the things used to be that, people are getting better at diagnosis, for lack of a better word, but doing the analysis. It's probably a combination of things. Clearly, we are seeing students who have more significant and more complex needs. It's not just one thing. We have students who are presenting with multiple issues. So it has gotten very, very, very complex, if you will. All of our cases are, and our folks are pretty much flat out in terms of the amount of cases that they have. Our special education teachers who are case managers, the number of cases that each person is handling and the level of complexity. That's very, 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 very telling in that particular area.
So do you expect a bigger enrollment come the start of the next school year? Expect a bigger enrollment of special ed kids?
Well, if the trend continues, I would say yes. Right now, we're probably, I think when we looked at everyone, including students who are in district and students who are out of district, we had about 1,000 students who were identified and who were receiving some level of service. Now, again, not everyone is receiving 30 hours a week of service. And again, there's a spectrum of service delivery there as well.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Anything else? Any more questions?
Save it for the brief.
How are we doing? I always ask this question, and Mr. Badansky always answers it recently. How do we know, year over year, how is our output metrics? How do we, I don't know whether you go by test scores or how the students do when they exit the schools, graduate. But how are we doing year over year with that? And is it the same? Is it changing?
Thank you, Mr. Leary. He loves that question. I just want you to know.
No, but
that.
it's good to, I don't know, it's difficult how to measure success.
That's-
You hear a lot of teachers say we don't like the test. It puts people in a tough spot, but it's it's a very tangible way of measuring things. You know best. So
Sure.
How do you measure success, and how are we doing? If you were talking to a group of parents who wanted to move right into town, how are we doing year over year with whatever you call success, and
Sure.
how do we measure it?
So thank you, first of all, for asking that question and allowing me to answer that. And it is an area that obviously that I'm charged with and that I enjoy doing. There are several metrics, and also recognizing that the Smarter Balance assessment that the state uses to measure our progress, as well as the SAT at the high school level, is one measure of progress. And we often stress that with our staff as well, that it's one measure of progress. But with that being said, we have district performance indicators that the board had adopted about 2 years back that range from several metrics. For example, percentage of high-need students, which is a combination of our EL students, our free reduced lunch students, and our special ed students that are making acceptable growth as defined by the state through the accountability index. So there's subgroup analysis that happens so that how are we doing relative to these special programs even for students that are taking this unless they're exempted through the alternative assessment because of their disabilities. We also track through various ways such as percentage of students in Tier 2 intervention or Tier 3 intervention. So where you see line items like a math specialist in the budget, that's where we're providing services pre-special education to potentially close achievement gaps that students may have to prevent them from becoming special education. And we measure their growth through a different assessment altogether than the Smart Balance, and we monitor that throughout the year in order to track student performance and outcomes in that area. We also have what we call 21st century forward-looking indicators. So, for example, the percentage of students proficient in more than one language. And recently, we've associated the seal of biliteracy with that, where we measure students' level of oral proficiency in a second language and transcribe that for students to promote opportunities for recognition and potential advantages for college admissions and access. Percentage of students graduating on time in 4 years. Percentage of students earning a certain amount of credits, that they're required to earn freshman year. Percentage of students in post-secondary education, both vocational and secondary. Percentage of truancy for our students. So coming to school means that we're doing a good job providing a safe learning environment for our students, or if it's not instructionally or academically related, the mental health supports that we're providing are helping our students who may experience emotional difficulties or anxiety and what have you, and work collaboratively with parents to develop plans to address that so that they can come back to school and learn appropriately. So we have multiple measures, and most recently we've begun work really associated most closely with that vision of a graduate. So within our units and our assessments across courses and content areas, how do we measure? If we say we want our students who graduate from the Southington Public Schools to be able to think critically, creatively, communicate effectively, collaborate, all of those skills that you're all hearing about in your workforce environments that are above and beyond the content knowledge that they'll attain and will change by the time they enter that career, those are the skills that allow them to be flexible, adaptable learners and successful for career beyond post-secondary education. So it's an ongoing process. There's some data analysis and some of it's anecdotal as well. And then lastly is the state performance indicators, which are only partially utilize the Smarter Balance assessment, but they also use things like access to the arts courses that we track, AP course offerings, both students who take those offerings and score 3 or higher on those, which makes them eligible for college credit. The UConn ECE courses that we offer and give our students advantages in terms of the amount of credits they earn for post-secondary education, which saves their parents money in tuition. So there are so many metrics in place that we often rely on all of them to gather a larger picture.
And when we look over the last few years, do those metrics show improvement?
So this year, I'm gonna use, even though it's one assessment, I'll use the Smarter Balance as an example. This year, and I was proud of this, I sent Tim a memorandum about it, was the largest amount of growth we've ever realized from one academic year to the next with the same cohort of students that we've ever realized. So our teachers are working their tails off with what we provide for them, and they are hitting it out of the park. Tim has always said the reason why we're such a successful community is because we have great families that are invested in their children's education and supportive of the outcomes, and we have teachers who come to work every day and give it their absolute all to improve outcomes for their students.
The state numbers you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
Are they? Do you actually use them? For analysis purposes to change what you do, or are they used just for comparative with other school districts? Because compared to other school districts, we've done well on those measures.
So good question. Both. We often do, because we're competitive in nature and Southington's a proud community. We do want to see how we're faring with other communities, and we also know if we're that's what families may be looking at to judge the quality of a school system. And we want to recruit families that to come to Southington that want to be here to continue the tradition that our families that are here are showing in terms of being proud of the educational system and supportive of it. So we do compare ourselves to surrounding communities that we consider to be innovative, consider to be that we can and should be competing with beyond our DERG even, in Hartford County. But one of the cautions we often have around Smarter Balanced Assessment, we call it post-mortem. It's the students have left that teacher. And so we get the results after the academic year is over for those students, and it will be a new teacher in front of them the following year with a whole new cohort of students. And so we use it really to reflect on how is our curriculum doing relative to promoting student growth. But the better question is the other assessments that we use, curriculum-based measures throughout the year, which is where we do a lot of curriculum analysis, and that's where the flexible grouping occurs for students and the differentiation occurs for students who may or may not be making the growth that we want for them by the end of the academic year. That's also where our SRBI process helps us to recognize students real time who may have needs that aren't being addressed concurrently.
Thank you. Who's best to address when a student does not go to the Southington Public Schools and they go to these charter or magnet or alternative schools, how that process works and how the town gets billed back? And what is that? How does that impact us?
I'll address part of it, and then I'll ask Mrs. Dinello to talk about the building. Southington has no choice, if you will. I'm a little play on words there because it is open choice. We do not have a choice in which students attend. We cannot set quotas on the number of students, and especially Capital Region Education Council, CREC, has quite a budget for advertising and promoting magnet schools. So we really have a difficult time, quite honestly, because we don't know what the numbers are going to be, and a lot of times they don't send us the enrollment until after the school year. So Mrs. Dinello does a fabulous job of estimating based on the previous year and looking at attendance, over time. The tuition for students who attend full-time, we pay the tuition, and we have between $600,000 and $700,000. Is that accurate, Sherry? Between $600,000 and $700,000 locked up in our budget that we have absolutely no control over. For students who go part-time, obviously there's a different cost, but it's not up to us at all. It's a choice program, so it's up to students and their parents. We do not pay for transportation. Transportation is provided under a grant. CREC actually manages the transportation. One of the issues with magnet school tuition, quite frankly, is that the number of dollars that are sent to the magnet schools to support their programming from the State Department of Education hasn't changed. Greg Florio, who's the executive director, they have a number that they've been working with for probably 6 or 7 years. So the dollar amounts per student coming from the State Department of Education to support magnet schools, which was the brainchild of the State Department of Education, haven't increased. So the costs then get passed on to us. In addition to that, when we have students attending magnet schools who have individual education programs, have special needs, that's an additional charge to us, which just simply is the way it is.
We have no control over what those charges are,
Correct.
how they're negotiated, who approves those budgets.
Correct.
It is what it is, and we get billed back.
That's essentially it. That is correct. There's no negotiation involved. We get the bill, and that's about it.
And I heard before the word competitive here. I don't often hear public school systems say competitive. It's good to hear. But I hear you try and be competitive, and you mean by competitive, you mean offer competitive to your peers within the reference group, but also competitive enough so a parent would look at Southington schools and look at other options, and they may, if the competitiveness is working, they may choose the Southington public school system.
Correct. And one of the things that we're trying to, it's a personal goal for me this year, is to do a better job of communicating with parents and members of our community the good things that do happen in Southington Public Schools. Now, we have that to a certain extent at the high school, and they reach down to the middle schools so that students and parents have an idea of the offerings. We happen to have a tremendous high school that has a broad range of offerings. Why students would go to a magnet school for engineering when they can be part of Project Lead the Way, I have no idea. Why they would go to a magnet school for the arts when we have arts that rival anyone in the state. There's a lot of marketing that happens that has parents feeling magnet schools are better in certain areas. But be that as it may, we need to do a better job of communicating the really good things that we do, because there are so many good things that happen in our schools every single day. And it can't just be in our annual report, because quite frankly, people don't read the annual report. But nonetheless, that's something that we're going to do a better job of this year. But we have programs that will compete with anyone. I think we were kind of put, this is my bias is coming out here, we're put at a competitive disadvantage because there are quite a few dollars in the Capital Region Education Council budget that are devoted to promoting magnet schools. Some of the advertising is very slick, and it's continuous throughout the course of the year. It's very hard to compete with that.
And do we see the same in special ed, where families get a sense, right or wrong, that outsourcing for a particular issue is better than having it handled in-house, when the truth may be something different? Is there a perception there as well?
I think it really depends on the individual circumstance, Mr. Leary. It's sometimes, because special ed is so emotional, sometimes we find ourselves on different sides of the table, and it's difficult to agree on how to meet the needs of a child. But I will say the reports that we get back, State Department of Education does an annual report every year. We're always reviewed very favorably. Our programs are excellent. We try to promote them, but we try to promote them in a reasonable way, because honestly, if we're doing a wonderful job, which we are, meeting the needs of our students with special needs, parents are going to move here for that purpose as well. So that's a little bit of a double-edged sword. But I do think we do a pretty good job with the outreach, and especially as students are young, our schools are such warm, loving, caring places that they establish good relationships with parents, and I think talk with them about the programs. But sometimes sometimes we just don't agree. Oh, a piece of good news about magnet schools. Thank you.
Okay, piece of good news.
So I would like to share what I do think is good news, is that for the first time, our magnet school enrollment for Southington students attending magnet schools has actually decreased in the current school year. We had 122 students last year, grades K through 12, at magnet schools. This year, we currently have 109 students. One of the major drivers, not only is,
Sorry, what was the first?
it was 109 currently, and it was 122 that we paid for last year. And the individual tuitions range anywhere from $4,400 to $5,800 per student. So you might think, well, if we're spending $15,000 per student in Southington, and we pay $5,500 to send them to a magnet. Well, isn't that okay, or aren't you saving money on those students? But the issue is we're not saving money, because having 5 second graders, for example, attend magnet schools is not going to reduce a teacher in a classroom for us. So when you spread those 5 students over 8 of our elementary schools, we're still going to have the same number of staff and benefits and bus transportation here in town. But one of the major drivers of not only trying to highlight what we have offering at our high school, but the fact that the Greater Hartford Academy of Math and Science is only offering their program full day now. Previously, high school students were able to attend what they call GAMIS for half day at the high school, where they could take some classes at Southington High School for half the day and take more of those math, science, engineering related classes in Hartford. And students liked that opportunity because they still could participate in interscholastic athletics here in Southington. When that option was taken away and they can only go to that school full time, it took the option to be able to participate in a lot of the other offerings we have here in Southington. So I think more students are now taking advantage of programs that we have here in district like Project Lead the Way.
Have any more? Any other questions? Okay, we'll go back to our grid and put the questions in. We thank everybody for coming. It's a great presentation. Any dialogue we have is good, and we're all here so we could open the channels of communication. Of course, the questions come up through the grid, but if anybody has to reach out and ask a question, I've heard from the chair of the Board of Ed that everybody on the Board of Ed is available at any time to take a phone call, to take a question, even though we said the formal written questions come up the process. But please, everybody feel free to reach out, and the other way too. If there's something you think we should know or something we need to follow up on personally, let's make sure we do have open channels. I want everyone to have a chance and know that they have the opportunity to call and communicate and collaborate as much as possible. The thing that is bothersome in the process is when there's a surprise or there's an insinuation or an allegation that something is buried, covered up, and there's an issue with transparency or clarity on something. And I want that to be something we try and avoid by talking to each other and discussing things. So we always are asking all the questions, getting all the answers as much as we can or much as we feel we need to make a decision. So thank you all for coming, and we're going to go right into give it a minute, and we'll go right into our regularly scheduled Board of Finance meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Page 20, if you want to see that reduction in that.
So now we'll start our regular Board of Finance meeting. Today's February 12th. It is now 8:15. We just went through the 7 p.m. Board of Education presentation of their 2021 budget, and we begin the regular meeting. We stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And our roll call.
Mrs. Zoni? Here. Mr. Morrison?
Here.
Mr. Bedoin?
He's not here.
Mr. Pocock?
Here.
Mr. Lebenik?
Absent.
And Chairman Leary?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. And we'll start with a public hearing item. It's an ordinance approving $10 million for costs related to the 2021 Road and Bridge Improvement Program and authorizing the issuance of $10 million in bonds and notes to finance the appropriation.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this was introduced to the Town Council on Monday night. This is not, the plan itself is certainly not new to this board, but what we're going to try to accomplish is that every 4 years we're going to be hopefully going to the public and explaining to the public the $10 million bond ordinance. The reason for that is that we want to spend at a minimum base number of $2.5 million a year for our roads. Along with the money that we receive from the state and possibly some budgetary numbers, we want to get that number so that we not only maintain our roads to a certain level, but also increase the level of our roads as time goes on. I believe that after discussions not only with this board and the Town Council last year, it is important that we understand that one of our major infrastructures being our roads and our bridges, we have to get into a habit of doing exactly that, knowing that we're going to have a minimum amount of money that we're spending each year, plus any assistance we have with our own budget and the state, and we must continue to spend that amount of money or more to make sure that our most important infrastructure outside of our buildings is our roads and our bridges. So this is step one of that plan. I know that we started doing it a little bit in the past, but this is something that I plan on bringing to the Board of Finance this year, and then again after 4 more years. To prove to the public how successful it is, this board allowed us last year to expend approximately $45,000-ish to do a full study on where our roads and our bridges currently stand. That full study then is put into data, which was carefully reviewed by Annette Turnquist and her staff, as well as the Keith Hayden and his staff. And it's important that we understand the formula. It's important we understand the software so that we can prove to the public that we decide to put this money is not something that's decided on any other basis other than the fact that it makes logical sense that the town's getting the biggest bang for its buck. And it also gives us a prognosis for the next 5 years on where we're going to stand every time that we put money in there. So I'll let Mrs. Turnquist explain to you that process. And then, of course, with your indulgence, we move forward to the town council for their public hearing, which will be in 2 weeks.
All right, wait a minute. I'm behind. I'll take the chair.
Tony, could you hit the lights just in the front? This one. To the right of you. Yeah. You have enough light on that? You should have asked her that before I took the light.
Yeah. You said Sherry hooked this all up?
She said it's all hooked up for you.
All right. Let's see.
And I should have mentioned that this already has gone through the Public Works Committee, and they unanimously recommended it to the town council and obviously to this board.
Does it get brighter? That seems kind of dark.
Say again?
Does it get brighter? That seems kind of dark.
Looks like it's getting brighter a little as we're watching it.
So we just got to let it warm up a little?
Yeah.
All right.
There it is.
Okay.
We're going to put 2,500 in the budget for some. We're going to make sure it's in there.
Oh, it's going to be, it would be in the technology budget. We wouldn't
No,
separate it.
well, whatever. Facilities, FF&E.
That's better?
Here come the yellow roads. Where's the potholes? I want to see.
You'll see him.
I'd have to
I
zoom
didn't
in
expect
for that.
hecklers in that, but that's okay.
I'm a little offended. I have no audience.
You do. You got the whole world. When you go to
That's true.
Stop and Shop and people say they saw you. But Channel 14's not working.
We're trying to get a grant to get that up and running also.
All right.
Yeah.
We need that. That's a part of our outreach to people who
More
can't.
people asking.
It hasn't been working in a while, so yeah, we're trying to get a grant for that.
It was on Monday, though.
Yeah, it shows them.
Okay, I apologize to those who have already heard this, but that's okay. We hear it again.
You got to use the microphone, though,
Oh. Okay.
best you can.
I need a longer mouse cord.
That's good.
Am I okay with this? Okay, fine. All right. Okay, so we retained a company called Street Scan. They were here in the fall to do our road assessment, and based on their findings, they assigned a PCI between 0 and 100 to each road segment, and PCI stands for Pavement Condition Index, and their findings are what you see on this map up here. It's all color-coded. They put each segment in a category, a PCI range, basically, which I'm not sure if you can all read the legend from where you are, but 0 to 10 is failed, 10 to 25 is in serious condition, 25 to 40 very poor, 40 to 55 poor, so on and so forth, all the way up to 85 to 100 being excellent. They found that the average PCI for Southington is a 76, which is in the good category, which I have to admit was higher than I expected, so I was pleasantly surprised, but we still have some work to do. We have many roads in the excellent category, which was good to see, but we also have some that are as low as in the 30s. So, now that we have all this data compiled and we have this great program, what do we do with this information? Along with the Street Scan work, the work that they did, they provided this program which is called Street Logics, and I just want to show you a couple of the key components. We won't go through it all, but there are some key features you should be aware of. The first one is called a decision tree, which we'll click on over here. And this basically is where you put in your different treatments, your full depth reconstruction, your mill and overlay, preventive maintenance, whether it's a 1-inch overlay, a chip seal, what have you. Let me scroll down so you can see. So I can completely customize this. This is just a sample I've been working with. Probably not, this isn't set in stone, but it's good for an example. And for each treatment option, I have the ability up here to set the PCI range. So, the way this is set, I think that says 48. 48 and below would be a full depth reconstruction. Again, these are just example numbers, but that's how that works. It's all color coded. Along with the various treatment types, I can also assign the unit cost based on, what we paid in previous years. Again, that's all customizable as well. And another feature in here is you can weight the functional class and the PCI. And functional class is if it's a local road, a major collector. So here they're rated equally in this scenario. They're both at 5s, but that can be adjusted. The next portion I want to show you is the budget planner. And this allows us to pick how many years we want to look at. I've been running various scenarios, but I've been going with 5 years. You can filter the information if you want to. If you only want to look at a certain treatment option, a certain PCI range, you can. I've been looking at all the roads, so I haven't filtered anything, but you have the ability to do that. And then you can set your annual budget. So if we want to look at 5 years, we click on this, I can enter the budget for 5 years. I'm sorry, I'm going to get in the way for a minute. Is that me making that?
$2 million a year?
Yeah, it won't let me. For some reason, the number lock isn't working. Maybe I can do. Oh, we'll use those. I promise it's worth the wait. All right, so we can apply that, and then we execute it. Suspense is killing us. All right, and what this does is it lays out our 5-year scenario. Each year has a different color, so you get this nice map that you can look at easily. I have the ability to manipulate this data, so I'm looking for a good example. See, this part of the street is in year 4, this part of the street is in year 2. That doesn't make any sense. I can change one segment to be the year of the other segment and, have a program that makes more economical sense than the colors that come up here. So I have the ability to manipulate that. Now, in the past, there have been years where we've done like 17 miles of road, but 15 miles of that would be a preventive maintenance, like a chip seal or something like that. And our theory has always been to do a couple roads or several roads in each category, and I don't think that's a bad theory. I think that's a pretty good theory. I just don't think we're there yet. I think we'll get there eventually. In all the scenarios that I've run as I've been working with this program, it seems like the recommendation is to concentrate on the worst roads. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because what the program is doing, it's trying to, as Mark said, give us the biggest bang for our buck. So if you bring a road that's currently a PCI of 33 up to 100, you're going to have a more profound effect on the average PCI than if you say chip seal a road that's between a 71 and an 80. That's already right around our average PCI, so it's not going to affect it all that much.
Yeah, but isn't it just... sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's okay.
If you just concentrate on bad roads, surely it's also economically a good thing is to take some of the fair to medium roads that you can do a very quick maintenance with, say chip seal or whatever.
Correct.
And stop them eroding where you have to change the whole pavement.
Right.
Isn't there got to be a balance between those two things, or?
There does, but the range, the PCI range where you would do a treatment like that, a lot of those roads are already right around the average. So, it's a good idea to treat them, but it's not really going to affect your overall health of the roads. And roads do deteriorate over time, so you certainly don't want a road that's an 80 to deteriorate to the point where it's a 30.
Right.
But that's why I said I think we'll get there eventually. I think down the road in a few years, we will see a program that has more preventive maintenance, and we will have a road or two in, this year as well.
Yeah.
But I think right now we have to concentrate on the roads that have been neglected or are in the worst shape, and I think down the road we'll get to more preventative maintenance. So, I mean, unfortunately, as you said, these are the roads we'd be concentrating on first are the more expensive roads. So you might only be doing 5 or 6 miles as opposed to the 15 or 17 you may have done in previous years.
And we have, 200 miles of roads in?
A little more than that, yeah.
But the next year there would be more, John. It wouldn't be 5, it would be 7 or 8.
Right, maybe not the next year, but,
So over time, it would
eventually.
even out.
Right, I think we would get there. Now, as I mentioned, and as you saw me enter, I've been working with a budget of 2 to 2.5 million, but hopefully we'll have more than that with Town Aid Road and LoSiP funds. But just so you're aware, a budget of this magnitude really only stops the bleeding here. That magnitude will basically maintain the average PCI. It may even go down a point or two. But, remember, our average PCI is in the good category, so it's not the worst possible place we could be. It all depends on what your goal is. I mean, $10 million is a great place to start. But if your goal is to improve on the PCI, you may need more funding than that. Maybe a referendum in fewer than 4 years, but, that's, of course, up to you. This whole program, it's a very slow, steady, ongoing process, and we need to commit to continuous maintenance. This program sets our backlog at about $30 million, but even if you somehow had $30 million to put into this program, you can't just wash your hands of it and be done, because as I mentioned, the pavement deteriorates over time. So no matter what you do, it's ongoing maintenance that we need to be committed to. That pretty much sums up my presentation, unless anyone has any questions about the program or...
I just want to say one thing. I can't stress enough, and I said it in the beginning, and Annette just said it here. This is an ongoing thing, and will continue to be an ongoing thing. And I just want to make sure, and everyone who's asked me so far, and some people have called me, and I keep telling them the same thing. It's no different than what you do for maintenance on your own home. So there's money you set aside each year for maintenance on your own home. This is something we have to do for 214, I believe, miles of road in this town. We have to make sure that we do not let them go down, but we need to make sure that they continue to be where they are, and then slowly, this is an aircraft carrier, it's not a speedboat, slowly we move into the higher categories. So as we talked about, at a bare minimum, we're talking about $2.5 million. But like I said before, that is not the safe zone, I think, obviously, with TAR money and money in the budget, because it's important to keep adding that number in there. And in my mind, I think we're probably going to be in the $3 to $3.5 million range.
That's including government,
Yeah,
LoSiP.
yeah. So it's the LoSiP money and adding a little bit each year because I don't want people to think that, hey, we did the bond, we're never going to see a road number in the general budget anymore. It doesn't work that way. But what it does is it diffuses the year cost that it would be with the bond. And Annette mentioned, right now we're planning on doing it every 4 years based upon what I just said. So this is an ongoing thing. So I think that we have to understand what it is. We have to understand that it's not a panacea. We're going to continue to do these bonds if we want to make sure that we keep our roads and bridges in a good, and that's the category they're in now, in a good condition. Because everything else relies upon it, and I know we just had the presentation from the schools. We have to make sure that the roads and bridges are acceptable for them. We had a very, very good grand list increase. Why? Because our infrastructure is in good shape now, but needs to stay in good shape. It needs to get better. So all this stuff relates upon our core things. So this is one piece of the infrastructure. You all know that, and you will see my budget next Tuesday, but there's also going to be infrastructure improvements in there for the parks. There's going to be infrastructure improvements for the roads the roofs of the town buildings, the HVACs of the town buildings. There's going to be personnel things too. These are all part of what the town needs to keep moving forward. So that's, I think, important for this particular aspect. I know I said at the council meeting, and I believe that roads and bridges are the core part of our infrastructure, and we have to take care of it.
Annette, along those lines, did you put higher numbers in and see what the effect was? Say $3.5 million a year for the next 5 years?
I did, just to see what it would do to the average PCI. It affects it. It'll keep it closer to where it is now. There's another part of the program where you can actually say, my goal is to maintain this PCI, or my goal is to increase the PCI to 80, and it'll tell you how much money you need to put in to obtain that.
Okay, because are we backing into this is the wrong word, but should we set ourselves a goal of where we want to be and then see how much money we should spend, or do we say, okay, we've only got X, OGO, this is all we can do? So which sort of way did you come at this from?
I mean, I'm working with the funds that I'm hoping are going to be
These are-
available. I mean,
All right, got
if we do have LOSUP and Town Aid Road money, it's very easy to put it in there and see
Yes.
which roads we should be doing. And if I could just plug this software a little more, because you did invest $48,000 on it, so you should know what it does. At the end of the construction season, I'm able to go in and enter in the projects we did, and it updates
Oh, okay.
PCI of
Yeah.
that road.
Okay.
And then, of course, the average PCI. So StreetScan estimates that every maybe 3 or 4 years we should have them come back to do an assessment, but in the meantime, putting in the projects and everything will maintain it. So I thought that was a nice little feature.
It is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, my road is green, so that's good.
That's good. That's good.
Oh, you could tell?
I know.
I can see it
They're all
right
kind
there.
of blending together from here.
It's a small... yes, I can see.
He knows the shape of it.
I know the shape of my road. Yeah. It's the only one that...
We have any other questions or discussion? Well, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Why did you ask for 10 million?
Well, we started out with the process of where we wanted to be, and in my mind, I put the $2.5 million in. I know what we're going to be getting for LOSIP, and I know what I'd like to put in the budget for the next couple of years. You'll see money in the budget for roads this coming budget, and that number or something similar to that, I'd like to continue on with that. Obviously, it won't affect the increase of the budget because it's already going to be in the budget. But in my mind, I'd like to see a figure of spending approximately 3.5-ish every year.
And honestly, just judging from past years, I mean, we try to do all our road construction in the summer when school isn't in session. Doing much more than that is a challenge.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
Actually, we talked about that too, and $3 million to $3.2 million is a challenge based upon the time period we have and the staff that we have. So
Yeah.
that's usually another aspect.
Yeah.
Well, we have another advantage, we've been doing storms, drains, et cetera. I mean, helps when you go to whatever you're gonna do with a road.
Yeah, we try to set I mean, this is why we're working on this now in the winter. We try to get which roads we're going to do, and then we'll go in and we'll reconstruct any catch basins that are failing and any underground utilities that need updating before we go and pave the road. I mean, that only makes sense.
So we've done a lot of catch basins.
We
where
have,
We're failing.
yeah, we do emergency
Not a
ones all over
little,
town,
Not a
but
lot, but a little.
yeah.
Yeah, the emergency ones we do on a per needed basis,
Right.
but we do all that work before a major road project too, so we get in there and
Right.
do all the drainage first.
Yep.
It's going to be an ongoing thing for years to come, and certainly new people will be sitting here before this is finalized at best. So,
Yeah.
yep.
The Sewells will finish relining first.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here with us. Now we need there's nobody here for a public hearing, so let the record show that.
Can you shut us the screen up?
you want me to-
Yes, and then. Thank you very much. I know that was your third time, and you only have one or two more to do. So
Third time.
It's
So
on a turn.
we'll move into old business, the approval of the January 15 minutes.
So moved.
Motion and a second. Any discussion or changes? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Well, minutes are official. Okay, the current state of the town revenues. We'll try and go quick unless there's an issue. How are we doing on revenue?
We're doing fairly well. Our prior year taxes are about 60,000 above budget. Our building permits and fees, 160,000 over budget. Interest on investments, 320 above budget. And our town clerk fees are about 80,000 over budget for 620,000.
Okay, expenses?
Expenses, there's nothing currently in our budget that would require any large appropriation.
And our snow and ice is holding.
Currently, absolutely. We're going to be a little bit more delayed with the capital projects. For some reason, my spreadsheet kind of blew up a little bit.
Okay.
So now I have to probably start from scratch just to get it started. So I'm hoping to have that done for next month for you guys.
Okay, go into our committees, sewer committee, Mr. Morrison.
No meeting since last time. The next meeting's tomorrow. So.
Okay, Public Works, we heard about the roads with Mr. Pocock, Mrs. Zoni.
Bulky waste permits are in. People are encouraged to go to the town hall to get them before it's too late. The interest that there had been in sidewalks for Carter Lane, the town sent out 35 letters. 29 were returned as no against it. There was one letter returned with unable to deliver, and 5 were not returned at all. So 29 no's, 1 no response, 5 no responses, and 1 couldn't get delivered. So nobody wanted them, so we're not going to have to pay for that. That's it.
Okay. We'll pass on self-insurance for now.
The meeting is going to be Wednesday
Okay.
of next week.
Open space?
No, there's a lot of things in the works, but that'll be down the road.
Economic Strike Committee, Mr. Morrison?
Yeah, there's just one minor issue, which may or may not be in the budget we see next week, which is to do a marketing plan for Southington based on, as a tourism destination. We discussed that. It's not a large amount of money, and it's probably got a big bang for the buck. So, but I'll delay that until we see what's in the town manager's budget. What's that?
You're lobbying.
I didn't say it. I just said it's going to be in the budget. Oh, it may or may not be in the budget. That's all.
We'll skip the Investment Committee this time. We'll go to Board of Fire Commissioners.
I don't have anything on that.
Okay. Any other committees, any other board communications? Okay, public communications. We have no public.
Our public left.
Our public is on TV or on the web streaming. Okay, we'll flip over to our consent agenda. We have 3 items in there. We have an appropriation for $18,670 for vehicle maintenance from loss in the Highway Department. We have $2,500 for community services, a vehicle that suffered some damage. And we have an appropriation for $22,741 for the Board of Education operations. That's where money's been received, and we just appropriated in.
Move to approve the consent agenda as noted.
Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. The next one, we have the manager memo. Is a recommendation to the town council on the bond ordinance of $10 million related to public hearing item number 1 regarding the roads and bridges.
Mr. Chairman, you got to pull 2 out when we get to it.
Okay.
So move to approve the bond ordinance moving to the town council.
Second?
With a favorable recommendation.
Favorable.
In favor of recommendation. Motion and a second.
Got it.
Any discussion?
Just minor items, which is it like this was with the Y Shell, that if we chose to, we could use part of the rainy day fund, or because there's no just language in here isn't definitive. So is that available to us if we decide to do that?
This gives the town the authority to use up to $10 million.
Up to 10, right.
If you wish to, with the advice to me and the council, if you said, you know what, we want to spend a little more money on road and we want to take some money out of the undated fund balance, you could do that.
Yeah, anytime.
It would have nothing to do with this.
Yes,
because, yeah.
correct. But is it, say we decided to use 8 million from bonding and 2 million from the rainy day fund, would that be, does this restrict that in any way?
I wouldn't.
I know you wouldn't advise it,
Yeah,
but does it restrict it in any
I
way?
wouldn't advise it because as we know, we're taking $2.9 million
Yeah, I
from the
understand.
rainy day fund.
Understand.
This coming through in my budget, and that's why it looks a little, when you took the top part of my budget, eventually you're going to see $2.9 million coming out. That's because it's coming out of the undated fund balance to be purchasing the
right.
John Weiss Health Center. So I would say I would go against it. I would want us to keep the authority for the $10 million to be able to.
Okay, just keeping our options open.
I understand.
And just to note that we did receive a schedule I had asked for of how much road debt we've been carrying and the repayment on it, because a long while back, it was supposed to be 11 million or something every year, every other year. And we're till the point where we had 40 million outstanding, and then it would revolve, if I remember properly, from years ago.
Right, with the intent that we would be bonding much quicker.
Yeah.
But as the projects progressed, we've determined that it would be more cost-effective to wait a little longer to obviously bond it, thereby paying less interest. But on the other side, obviously, we still have more debt to put on the books, right? And I did want to point out that included in the package was a debt payoff for the 10 million that I included, and at times I've been asked why I would show it all at once versus in pieces. That's really like the worst case scenario, and that's how I've presented it in the past. First of all, right now it's difficult to assess how we're going to be bonding it. Most likely it'll probably be 5 million and 5 million if we progress through the projects quickly. We do have a policy in place that we bond every 18 to 24 months, with the exception, obviously, when we had the middle schools, we had a bond every year, just because of the sheer magnitude of that project. So my thought process is that even though we're using that fund over 3 to 4 years, we'll probably be bonding it in 2 installments. But the worst case scenario would always be bonding it all at once. That would be your highest cost.
Right.
You even said you'll have trouble doing $4 million a year. You don't have enough time and resources. Okay.
Yeah, just, sorry.
Keep going, please. No, we're still in discussion.
Just one minor issue, which is, if we're going to obviously look at this, and we're obviously going to look at, and I don't want to get ahead of the discussion, but we're obviously going to look at the library building and, a couple of other things. I just think we should bring this into the budget discussion this year, because obviously you need to look out, how you're going to pay for this. I mean, yeah, it's bonded, but we need to understand the impact that has on the budgets in the out years, and make sure that we don't go too crazy. But I'll just throw that out.
And we will include those projects in a projection that's in the budget.
Yeah, got it. Good. You got the library already?
Okay, we have to do a
Roll call.
roll call vote on it.
Mrs. Zoni?
Yes.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Mr. Pocock?
Yes.
Chairman Larry?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, and the last one we have to pull, we're going to have an abstention. We don't have a quorum to handle the 8:31 at the Calendar House.
I'll put it on the next agenda.
Yeah. And so now we'll adjourn to executive session. The time is 8:44 to discuss contractual and real estate matters. And right after that, immediately after that, we'll adjourn our meeting. So the meeting ends now.
I make a motion
Make a
now?
motion to...
Make a motion to go into executive session. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You're in executive session. Let me know when the cameras are off and